On the 21st of October 2020, the Turkish Coast Guard Command publishes footage and pictures from two different rescue operations in the regions of Mugla and Marmaris. The incidents, number 233 and 234 in the relevant dataset shared by the Turkish Coast Guard, mention the rescue of 197 asylum seekers, which were reportedly left adrift on life rafts by the Hellenic Coast Guard as a result of an interception and pushback operation. In order to investigate the claims made by those who filed a complaint with the European Court of Human Rights, we analyzed footage shared with their legal representatives and also conducted interviews with 10 of them. According to the testimonies and the available footage, the asylum seekers were initially all on board a fishing boat with which they were told they would reach Italy by traveling through international waters in the south of Greece. The fishing boat, as seen in the footage and as described by the asylum seekers, had 3 different layers. A deck, where most of those traveling were located throughout the journey. A room, which was a designated area for some of the women and children traveling, and the captain's cabin on top of the room. We reconstructed the vessel, taking into account the footage and the measurements shared by the asylum seekers. The group originally boarded the fishing boat near Marmaris using an inflatable boat which was towed by a rope. Asylum seekers, represented in the reconstruction with blue dots, were split in groups of 10 to 15 at a time, entered the fishing boat before the sunrise of the 19th of October 2020 after having spent at least 3 days in the nearby shore, hiding in the woods. They then started their trip, following the route east of the Greek island of Rhodos. While en route, some of the asylum seekers report seeing an unmanned aerial vehicle which circled them at least twice before going away. They were not able to identify the drone's model or its origin and purpose. According to the asylum seekers' testimonies, the fishing boat then continued sailing on international waters without any further interaction with any Greek, EU, or Turkish assets and spent almost an entire day in this section of their trip. During the morning hours of the 20th of October 2020, the asylum seekers report getting inside a storm while traveling south of Crete. Historical weather data and media reports corroborate the weather conditions described by them, who mentioned heavy winds, large waves, and hail in the region. It was at this point that they reached out to the Hellenic Coast Guard and human rights monitoring groups pleading for assistance and rescue. The weather conditions eventually forced them to recalibrate their course and get closer to the shores of the Greek island. According to court documents examined for the investigation, the Hellenic Coast Guard informed the cruise liner, Mein Schiff 3, which was in the vicinity of the fishing boat in distress. Past-track data from marine traffic corroborate the position and the route of Mein Schiff 3 when it received the request by the Hellenic Coast Guard. But according to Hellenic Coast Guard records, the cruise liner was unable to spot the fishing boat. In the meantime, the Hellenic Coast Guard dispatched the search and rescue vessel number 519 in order to locate the fishing boat. According to the Hellenic Coast Guard, the S.A.A vessel wasn't able to locate them at the time. The Hellenic Coast Guard has not made available the exact route that the S.A.A 519 followed, yet for an undisclosed reason, the 519 remained on duty and did not return to port for the next 25 hours, despite not having been able to spot the vessel. Meanwhile, the asylum seekers continued communicating their location with monitoring groups and relatives and further approached the shores of Crete. A few hours later, between 3 and 4 p.m. local time, they report seeing S.A.A vessel 519 heading towards them, accompanied by another patrol vessel of the Hellenic Coast Guard. All asylum seekers we interviewed identified the boat by its distinctive orange color and mentioned that it is the one that can be seen in the video received. According to their testimonies, they were instructed by the officers on board the 519 to wait in position until another vessel of the Hellenic Coast Guard would come to assist them in continuing their journey. Distrustful of the offer of the Hellenic Coast Guard, the fishing boat continued its route for a brief amount of time alongside the coast of Crete. While the fishing boat continued sailing, the asylum seekers on board report seeing a Hellenic Coast Guard speedboat, and possibly a second one as well, approaching and attempting to stop the fishing boat and forcing it to change course or stop its engine. The speedboat or speedboats eventually forced them to approach the first set of Hellenic Coast Guard vessels again, which once more instructed them to wait. The fishing boat waited there for about 4 hours, and the asylum seekers on board report that their groups kept interacting and maintained visual contact with at least one of the Hellenic Coast Guard vessels, which stayed around the vicinity of the fishing boat the whole time. Around 9 p.m., the asylum seekers report that at least 2 Hellenic Coast Guard dark-colored speedboats, and possibly a third one as well, approached the fishing boat, and that masked men in uniform boarded their boat. They shouted down, down, down and started physically assaulting everyone on board while searching for the captain. On the first video, received by the NGO alarm phone, the asylum seekers reportedly attempt to tell the officers that they have reached out to the UN.
Okay, we contact with UN!
While the second one shows one of the masked officer in uniform who managed to climb the stairs of the fishing boat in front of the captain's cabin. After making their way around the boat and the asylum seekers, the commandos, represented by red dots, proceeded in forcing them to embark the speedboats by throwing them onto them. According to the asylum seekers, they were split into 2 groups, each one of them ending up in a different Hellenic Coast Guard open sea patrol vessel. Asylum seekers of the first group report being searched and having all their belongings removed by officers. Asylum seekers of the second group report having to give up their personal items on their own. Both Hellenic Coast Guard vessels then started their journey back towards Turkey's waters, and left the asylum seekers adrift on board life rafts in 2 different locations at 2 different times. The life rafts of the first group were towed by a Hellenic Coast Guard speedboat and were then abandoned. while the life rafts of the second one were left adrift. Both groups report that they were physically and verbally assaulted throughout their detention on board the open sea patrol vessels of the Hellenic Coast Guard, and then were forced into life rafts. According to the testimonies, no food or water had been provided to them throughout their detention. The asylum seekers were also not provided with any means of maritime safety equipment or navigation tools even after being forced into the life rafts.